It is wonderful to see you. So I was lucky enough to be up at Microsoft on this past Thursday, and I was surprised to see how much tweaking is going on in terms of physical spaces there. I was expecting sort of much more of a kind of technical dive, and instead they have this big room called the Hive, where it's a warehouse where they sort of test different like shaped conference tables and it's really interesting. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how, if I'm a company, I might want to sort of rethink the space and design of my kind of conference rooms.
Yeah, you bet. It's great to see you again. Great to be here. Well, I think the thing that's most interesting for us over the last couple of quarters as we've been preparing for this transition is we've realized that as we all head back to the office, we have to rethink our space. And in particular, we have to think about designing that space for the people who aren't physically present. And that's just kind of turning the whole idea of design on its head. And a lot of what you saw when you were up here was that process of us really starting to think, what if every meeting had a digital participant? How could we make sure that that digital participant didn't feel like they were a second or a third class citizen in the dialogue? And that means that you're really starting to look at how you use the physical space, how you bring people in digitally, how you represent them, how easy you make it for people to exchange ideas. And just broadly speaking, I think, the future really of work rests on this idea of flexibility in how, when, and where you work. And that's going to imply a lot of differences in how we use our office space and what we actually use the office for.
So if I have, say, a standard conference room, like, rectangular table, maybe I have or don't have a camera in there, what should I be thinking about in terms of making it more hybrid friendly?
Well, we're right now working on plans that would allow us to have a good, better, best approach to that. Good would be just doing a little bit with software and hardware. So the example would be, hey, you need to make sure you have a big enough monitor people can see. Cameras become paramount in this case because just one camera that shows the breadth of the room ends up projecting a room where people look so small you can't tell what their reactions are, and you lose the ability to really have a connection. So you can start with some great, fantastic software, cloud-based software, pair that up with some really good hardware, and without changing anything else in the room, you're already on your way. That's a good approach. The better approach is when you start to look at what you might do with furniture and reorienting the room. In particular, as you saw, we're starting to experiment with furniture that allows all the faces to be seen at once for a digital participant, even reorienting the room so you're facing the long wall. And then the best would be that you really think about a conference room and just really redesign it for those digital participants. You won't do this for all of your conference rooms. We think most people would choose between 5 and 10% of their spaces to do. But that good, better, best allows us to capture you where you are and make sure we can work within a budget too.
So Emma, you work with a lot of different kinds of companies and industries. How does this all apply to companies that might not be, knowledge workers sitting in a conference room?
Yeah, just to take a step back here and just orient ourselves, frontline workers represent about 80% of the global workforce, Arianne, and 90% of companies employ them. And there are nearly 2 billion frontline workers on the planet. So they're a massive, massive segment of employees. And of course, they often work on shifts. They often work on their feet. They're often mobile first if they have the devices at all. So they have a very different experience. And we did some research recently across 9,600 frontline workers across 8 different industries and 8 different countries. And the feedback was, wow, technology is definitely needed in order to empower them more successfully, and a much better prioritization of culture and training. And I can certainly share more with you about that, but those are the 2 key pieces of feedback.
So I think we all kind of know what it looks like if you're sitting at your desk and you're using Microsoft Teams and so is somebody else and you're collaborating together. What does this look like for, say, doctors or burger flippers or just people who are not sitting stationary?
Yeah, it's exactly that. You go into hospital, it's all the doctors and nurses on their feet, or you go into a retail store, it's the floor employees. You get on an airplane, it's the cabin crew. Hotel, it's the hospitality folks, or in production lines, it's the manufacturing crews. So very different types of roles. And really what they're looking for, the feedback told us, is a couple of things. One, they traditionally haven't been, before the pandemic, they really were not as digitized as they could have been. They didn't have the software to support them. In fact, we saw a 400% increase in Teams monthly usage since March 2020. But a third of the frontline workers we surveyed said they still don't have the tech to do their jobs, to get their jobs done. So, and then they're also telling us that of the ones who did, 55% of them are saying, I got tech, but I had to learn it on the fly with no formal training. And I'm kind of nervous I might lose my job if I don't adapt to the tech properly. So think about things that they might need. They might need things like shift scheduling, a digital form of that, so they don't get their shifts on paper anymore. Or they might need to know what tasks they have to achieve in that shift. Or they might need to be able to do approvals with their supervisor to say that they designed the aisle correctly for Black Friday, or they gave this medication to a patient. So a lot of these new features we're building in Microsoft Teams are focused on frontline workers and the types of jobs they need with the types of devices that they often use on the go in their shift.
Jerry, do you like to talk a lot about digital fabric? So can you tell me what this is? Can I buy it at the garment district? Why do I need this?
Well, you get me started on digital fabric. That's right. The big trend that we see coming out of the pandemic really is that almost every organization has recognized they have to connect their people, that it's all about connections. And so I've kind of drawn this analogy of, boy, that makes me think of a digital fabric where you're kind of using digital technologies to weave your organization together in a way that works for you. Emma's hit on some of it. There are a lot of people who were not digitally enabled prior to the pandemic. We're seeing that kind of go through the roof, the investment there for frontline workers in particular. But it's not just the connections that matter, it's what you can do after those connections. So in particular, for us, for instance, we believe that communication modalities need to come together. You need to not only be able to have a video conference with someone, but you have to be able to have persistent chat. You have to enable asynchronous collaboration, even being able to kind of connect that with a phone system so that you can connect with people who aren't in your digital fabric realm, if you will. And then there's one other aspect, Arianne, that really catches my attention right now. When you have that connection, we find there are kind of two strands to the digital fabric. One is what I'd call the strong ties between you and your daily working group. These are people you work with every day to get things done. But the other is what we would call weak ties. These are relationships, touch points that you have with people that you may not see or work with every day. It turns out that fabric is stronger when you weave both types of strands into it. And so digital connections need to be able to do both. And that's where we're already starting to see companies recognize that as they look at kind of some of their collaboration networks and how they've suffered over the course of the last 2 years.
Microsoft is interesting in that, the company is all in on their hybrid policy, if you want to talk a little bit about that. But I think a lot of people here can probably relate to sort of this sense of being kind of remote buddies with the people that they work with. Like you see each other on a video conference once or twice a day, and you kind of text or message back and forth. But the sense at Microsoft, when I was there, was much more evolved than that. There's really sort of a kind of interwoven sense, whether people are in the office or not. And I was wondering how people can kind of get from the remote buddies stage to a more sort of integrated, woven stage, no matter where people are.
Emma, you want to take that, or?
Well, what I'd say actually, when you think about the front line on this one, Arianne, it's just to build on what Jared just said. He said that these strong ties became stronger, but weak ties, it's important that they don't become frayed. It's so prevalent in the front line. 76% of frontline workers are saying that they're feeling super bonded to their coworkers in the last 2 years, Arianne. Just think of it, labor shortages, health risks, supply chain woes. Everybody's in the trenches together. They're super connected. But guess what? They have no or very little connection to corporate, to headquarters. They're not getting that sense of prioritized culture from corporate, and they're not seeing the flow of communications. So back to that sort of weak tie digital fabric that is so important. If you really want your frontline to be strong, it will make your business a better bottom line. It means you need to prioritize culture from corporate. So your flow of communications gets to your frontline. Why is that important? Well, guess what? All of us want to come to work every day. We want a sense of purpose. We want a sense of excitement about the mission. We want to feel how our work contributes to the company's mission that we work for. If you don't talk to your frontline, they don't feel that connection. Guess what? They might go somewhere else where they do feel that connection.
And I'll add, Arianne, to that. One of the things that we've seen is that people are really starting to realize that physical connections, in-person connections, have real value, but you just have to think about them differently. You actually have to arrange them. And so going from remote buddies to doing something different, not only applies to your frontline where you're trying to make sure that you get the connections that Emma's talking about, but it also applies to your information workers who might not be in the same place very often at all. They're these remote buddies. And so we are seeing companies very deliberately decide that they're going to use their space as a way to gather people together. Like, hey, we really want you to come in for this half a day or this meeting. And oftentimes when I see that happen, whether it's at customers or here at Microsoft, we see kind of a little bit of rejoicing, lots of hugs all around. People actually make a physical connection, I think builds up some social capital. So that's another kind of, it's very practical, but it's starting to play out here all across the world.
One of the things that struck me when I visited, Jared, was that you were sneaking out at about 3 p.m. with your backpack. And you were gone for the day. And I was wondering if you can talk to me about kind of your own schedule and also kind of Microsoft's approach to hybrid for all 180,000 employees.
Yeah, sure. But first, let's kind of zoom out for a second and look at the policy change that we made. We didn't implement too many new policies, but the one policy change we made that is probably going to have the longest lasting, most durable effect is we just told employees that for most positions, there are a couple of exceptions, but for most positions, you can work up to 50% of the time remote or from home without having to talk to your manager, get any additional approval from your manager. And what we're trying to signal there is that we want you to have the flexibility, but we also want to signal that in-person FaceTime, like we just talked about, is really important. What that has meant for me personally has been pretty liberating, to be honest with you. Prior to the pandemic, I kind of went in at 7 and came out at 6, and it turned out so did about 40,000 other people. And so you were stuck in traffic, you were, all sorts of things happening. So as you saw me slink out there at 3, I was going back to some more meetings. In fact, I had one on the way home. But the traffic patterns are different because I can choose my own time. And so I literally have not sat in traffic, now since I started going back to the office ever, just because I've been coming in at different times. And that's pretty cool. Like, even if just that one thing were different for me, it would make a really big difference in Seattle traffic.
That's right. And Jared, just to build on that, we actually built that feature into Microsoft Viva. We created the feature even for people who are at home, working fully from home, 100% remote. We built in something called a virtual commute. Arianne, to get that same sense, when you used to leave the office, you'd be sitting in traffic, but it was a great way for you to calm down your mind, for you to sort of think back on your day, get ready for tomorrow, and literally virtually disconnect in a very mindful way from your job that day. But then the next thing we did was build that virtually for customers at home, because guess what? You walk from your living room into your kitchen and you have no time to mindfully disconnect. So whether you're 100% remote or whether you're hybrid, hop in and out, Microsoft still wants to enable you to have that opportunity to mindfully disconnect.
Emma, how do you handle organizations that might not be as forward thinking about hybrid work and hybrid arrangements, especially if you're talking about frontline workers who, historically show up from, for their shift? How do you address that?
Look, well, I speak to customers all the time. And in fact, one of the largest, world's largest retailers, the CEO was at Microsoft a few months ago. And he said, you know what? I don't worry about my supply chain and my logistics. What I'm really worried about is the health and well-being of my frontline, because I realize without my ability to be there in person and sort of touch them and feel what's going on the floors of my retail store, I just don't know what's going on to the same degree. So I say to every single one of them, you need to do two things. You have got to empower your frontline with the right digital tools to make them feel empowered and happy. You got to connect them to your company mission through corporate communications, and you've got to take care of them with the right culture. They are just like information workers. They need the same sense of connection and purpose. They need the same sense of collaboration and problem solving on behalf of your company. They need the same sense of well-being. But guess what? They just need it in a slightly different way. They need it in a time-shifted way. They need it in a mobile-first way.
Yeah. I was wondering if you can tell us what is coming, 5 years down the line. What are our meetings going to be like? I think that's what everyone here really wants to know.
Well, I get that quite a bit. And so we'll tell you some of the trends. We're learning just like everyone else. We're trying to be students of the time. But one of the biggest things I think we've realized through all the research that we've done is that even though we're asked to work very hard at work, we are not robots. And that may sound funny, but it boils down to this truth. People come together in organizations to get things done because there is this energy that happens when individuals and groups make connections. And that idea of connection is just super important. So if we take that idea of connection and then kind of project out and say, well, where is the meeting going? Where is this all going? It's going to be all about bridging the digital and the physical so that you have a really rich connection with people, again, one-on-one or groups of people. So you'll already see us starting to talk about this idea of the metaverse. I think a lot of people kind of, smile and nod or roll their eyes even when they think about the metaverse. But for us, it's very real because it's all about deeper physical and digital connections. So what should you expect? Well, we fully expect, as an example, that you'll start to see people being projected into physical spaces with holograms. The research already is telling us that you do feel more connected to someone when you have kind of a 3D type experience like that. We think that 3D immersive digital spaces will become more and more prevalent. Again, just focused on the connections that people can make and how they can work together. And it will take a little bit of time, but we think we'll go from the basic conference room, good, better, best that we talked about at the beginning to that type of setup, mostly based on how does the technology allow us to feel like we're together. That will be the focus of everything we do.
Yeah. Emma?
I was just going to say, and even in the front lines today, we're doing some fun things like that. We've brought walkie-talkie digital version of it to Zebra devices that tens of millions of frontline workers use. So you can get that instant connection, or we've integrated into headsets with audio video. So hands-free in production environment, safe way with a construction helmet, you can call Arianne back at her home office in Idaho and get her to help you fix the machine problem in the production line.
Do you see in the next 5 years a sort of more immersive kind of meeting environment for the typical customer, or do you see more sort of a lower tech but no barriers, very kind of clear meeting setup coming to most users?
I think in reality, so again, working with a bunch of customers right now, I think that about 10% of space, it's my rough estimation, is going to be kitted out like nobody's business. It's going to have incredible technology that really makes you feel like, wow, that person in Germany is right here in Seattle. That technology is being offered on the market today. It's going to take some time for build out and for broad adoption, but I think you'll see that. But probably the bigger, kind of more impactful thing will be what we carry with us, what allows us to actually, wherever we are, have those same types of connections. So you'll see differences in cameras. You'll actually see the ability, for instance, as we look at some of the technology associated with HoloLens and holograms, become smaller and more portable. Those things, I think, over time, because they'll be more personal and more with us, actually will make the bigger impact. But I think you'll see both. Both things will be available.